From Washington, D.C., this is Middle East Focus.
Hello, and welcome to Middle East Focus, a weekly podcast on regional affairs and U.S. policy, produced by the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. I'm Alistair Taylor, MEI's editor-in-chief. On today's program, we'll be talking about Iran's snap presidential elections, set to be held on June 28th, following the sudden death of President Ebrahim Raisi in a helicopter crash last month. The 63-year-old regime loyalist was widely viewed as a leading potential successor to the Islamic Republic's 85-year-old supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The elections come as Iran faces a number of challenges, both at home and abroad, ranging from long-running economic troubles and preparations for an eventual leadership transition to the regional reverberations of the war in Gaza and the tit-for-tat exchange of missile and drone strikes with Israel in April. You can subscribe to Middle East Focus on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast providers. To help us understand the upcoming elections, the candidates, and what it might all mean for the future of Iran, I'm joined today by two great guests, Alex Vatanka and Ali Afshari. Alex is the director of MEI's Iran program and the author of two books on the country, including, most recently, The Battle of the Ayatollahs in Iran, the United States, Foreign Policy and Political Rivalry since 1979. Ali is an Iranian political analyst and pro-democracy activist. He's a former student leader and member of the Central Committee of the Office for Consolidation of Unity, the main and largest student organization in Iranian universities during the reformist era. Alex, Ali, welcome to the podcast, and thank you both very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Alistair.
Thank you.
Alex, to start off with, before we get to the elections themselves, I want to briefly touch on Ebrahim Raisi and his legacy as president. How was he viewed while he was in office, and what do you think he'll be remembered for in Iran?
Well, look, I can answer the question in the following way, Alistair. The man was given the presidency essentially on a silver platter. He never really fought for the vote as such. It was a result of a carefully managed election where Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, and we have to assume the generals in the Revolutionary Guards, kind of agreed that he was the guy they wanted to be in the presidential palace. They had their own motives. And he was there for just under 3 years. So he didn't have a popular mandate. Now, these days, following his death, the authorities, particularly the pro-regime media, are busy trying to glorify him, everything he stood for, his achievements. But frankly, when you look at the hard numbers and the hard realities that Iran faces, things like the sanctions that are still on Iran, Iran's troubled relations with its neighbors, Iran's isolation in many ways on the international stage, certainly with the Western powers and so on. And I can go on. When you look at all those factors that are troubling for Iranian voters, none of them were areas where Raisi was able to, as president, to make any headway. So I think, if you look away from official efforts to glorify Raisi, the fact is that he was the weakest of the presidents in the Islamic Republic since 1979, entirely beholden to Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. And I think that's the one thing that most people will remember him by.
Ali, when Raisi died suddenly last month, there was quite a bit of sort of initial skepticism about the official narrative around what happened. Many Iranians were suggesting that there may have been foul play involved. Has that speculation died down over time? And how is his death perceived at this point?
As you say that this sudden death that was comes with the very heavy skepticism inside Iran, and it still existed, especially after how they managed the new upcoming election comparison with the last election that was much more controlled. And now it seems that a circle of power or Khamenei, it seems that they happy from the sudden disappearing of the Raisi, because the election choices is organized in a way that the next administration, it seems, is not the continuation of the Raisi's administration. Either Ghalibaf will be the next president. It seems that his personality and his idea, it has more difference, that similarity with the Raisi mindset. Still, nobody can say anything with certainty. A lot of the conspiration theories around the Raisi's death, but it seems that the government and the Iranian society is going to completely forgot that man that was in the puppet of Khamenei, and also he was the most unpopular president in the history of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Also around his very poor performance, especially in the economy and the Iranian everyday life. So I think he's gone. He's gone. He has nothing that continue and exist in the memories of the Iranian.
Gone and forgotten, in other
Yes,
words.
gone and forgotten.
Ali, the Constitution requires that elections to replace the president be carried out quite swiftly, within 50 days. Despite that short kind of ramp-up time, 80 candidates registered to run, a number that the Guardian Council, the body tasked with vetting those candidates, cut down dramatically, as it often does, to just 6. Were you surprised by any of the candidates who were disqualified, including some of the kind of more well-known names like former Speaker of Parliament Ali Larijani or the former President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad?
No, it is the second time, or maybe the third time in the history of the Islamic Republic of Iran, we have an emergency presidential election. So that was very expected that the Guardian Council disqualified the most of the candidates. But something that was unexpected, that was the vetting of the Pezeshkian, Dr. Masoud Pezeshkian. He was disqualified 2 times. And the last one, that was just the last presidential election in 2020. But if we analyze more deeply, and especially due to the idea of the thinking of the Pezeshkian, that he publicly announced he's not either principalist, he's not either reformist, he's going beyond that duality. So it seems that not much difference between this election and the last election in terms of the competition, but relatively we have more limited competition right now. But still, election is a mock election in the eyes of the majority of the Iranian people. And so far that we have approximately 1 week from the election day, it seems that there is no much difference between this election and the last parliamentary election in the attention of the people. But historically, especially in the last 2 decades, the turnout in presidential election has been higher relatively than parliamentary elections. So it seems, in my opinion, maybe we have a more competitive election than the 2020, but not much difference. And all these people also, all the candidates, follows the Khamenei's order and idea.
Alex, Ali obviously touched on this a little bit just now, but looking at the 6 candidates that the Guardian Council did approve, can you give us a brief, maybe like pen portrait? Who are they? What's important for our listeners to know about them?
Yeah, look, there are 6 candidates that were approved by the Guardian Council. Hundreds had registered with the Ministry of Interior, but this is typical Iranian sort of theater that the regime puts together before election times. They want everybody to show up at the Ministry of Interior to pretend that they can run for the president. It gives a kind of a sense, perhaps, to people who might not follow Iran closely that, oh my God, Iran has elections and anybody can run. But, the fact is, very carefully does the office of the Supreme Leader. And it's important to remember, the Guardian Council are 12 members who are directly or indirectly basically beholden to the Supreme Leader's office, Ali Khamenei. So these are not individuals who decide who can run. They have to essentially implement the wishes of the Supreme Leader, who's been there since 1989. And on this occasion, you had 6 candidates, one who you could call a establishment reformist. I agree with Ali. Masoud Pezeshkian doesn't want to call himself a reformist, but that's the sort of camp he's coming from. That's his background. He's a former parliamentarian, a heart surgeon. He's an ethnic Azeri Kurd, which is interesting in a Persian majority setup that has created some excitement that, a non-Persian might become a president. But look, as I said, he's establishment candidate. He wouldn't be there if he hadn't been approved, obviously, as I just laid out. And he has, in the last few days, come out and very openly said, look, I'm not going to go against the wishes of the Supreme Leader. That's it. That's plain and simple. He's not going to do anything to upset the wishes of the Supreme Leader. So that's the one establishment reformist. He's facing 5 individuals from the so-called hardline camp. Now, you got the sort of soft hardliner to the hard hardliner. Soft hardliner probably is Mohammad Ghalibaf, who's the current Speaker of the Parliament. He's been part of this system from a young age. In his early 20s, he's from Mashhad, the hometown of the Supreme Leader. He's not somebody who's going to surprise the supreme leader, frankly. In fact, he's had all sorts of issues involving corruption and so forth. And the reason why he gets away with it is because he's got the backing of the supreme leader. So he's on one end of that spectrum. At the hard end, the radical end, is Saeed Jalili, who essentially is a man who's lived in his own bubble for decades. I mean, he's somebody who really has some amazingly strong views about how this world of ours works. When you're thinking of the fact that he's traveled a little outside and really has a very poor sense of how the rest of the world works. So kind of scary for many Iranians to think this guy is just too dangerous. And he's actually too dangerous even for hardliners. So essentially, you have one reformers, so-called reformers, and 5 hardliners, and we can sort of sit back and see who does well. I guess in many ways, Alistair, last point on this is so much will also depend on voter turnout. I mean, the last Majlis elections in March, turnout in places like Tehran was in the single digits. So turnout is going to be a big issue. The regime is really hoping they're going to bring the people out. I doubt it. This is not 97. This isn't even 2013. The vote out is going to be much less than the regime is hoping for.
Ali, I wanted to follow up with you to get your thoughts in a little bit more detail on the sort of odd man out here of the 6, Pezeshkian. Why do you think he was allowed to compete? Is it sort of a kind of transparent effort to drum up some enthusiasm and boost turnout? And how much of a constituency for a quote-unquote reformist candidate is there in Iran at this point?
I think from what Pezeshkian at the beginning, when he announced that he want to participate in the election, he told that his goal that is to increasing of turnout. He publicly said that and continues this during his activities after vetting by the Guardian Council. And also, it was surprising that he told in the Qom during his speech that he called people, if you want to, please vote. Doesn't matter, vote to me or to somebody else. And it's shocking that a candidate asks people just to vote, not to him. Because in the election, it's obvious that the candidate wants to encourage voters to vote to that person. But in my opinion, that the big boycott by the Iranian people in the last 3 elections caused some sort of worriness and for the circle power and especially Khamenei, that they think that the continuation and repeat of those last 3 elections, that it imposed an existential threat for the government. So they need to increasing of turnout, but in the control and limited way. They don't want a big turnout. That's why they disqualified the person like Larijani and let them Pezeshkian, that they think that the Pezeshkian has not much chance to win in that election. And also Pezeshkian is more controllable than the others because he shares much more similarities in terms of the discourse, political beliefs, and loyalty to Khamenei than Rouhani or Khatami and either an Ali Larijani. It's quite interesting that the Pezeshkian, it seems that either that he was continuously in the last 5 parliaments, but it seems that he came out from the cave, and his words and the idea is much far from the average of the Iranian people, especially from the youth generation. So the government wants to pass the crisis created by the movement of the Women Freedom Life. And that's why they let Pezeshkian participate or take part in the competence. But in the other side, the Pezeshkian, maybe he wants to do something, but there is the 2 major obstacles. From this, the limited authorities and the capacity by the president. And what's the most important thing is that the Pezeshkian politically is very weak. And he's the oldest school. So I don't see much chance that he wins in that election because his victory needs at least 60% turnout. That it seems very unlikely that happen.
So a bit of window dressing to drum up some enthusiasm while kind of maintaining a hold on the elections and not a real chance that he would actually emerge, in your view, as a victorious candidate.
Yes.
Alex, I just want to kind of elaborate a little bit more on the issue of turnout. I think, as you said, in the last presidential elections, fewer than half of people actually voted. In the parliamentary elections, we saw, I think, single digits in Tehran. Do you think there's anything different? Is there anything else that the regime is trying to do to drum up enthusiasm other than Pezeshkian? Do you see that having any impact?
Well, look, in a system where you can fiddle with the numbers, you can literally put out numbers and say that's the number of people who came out to vote. I suspect they're not going to, lose too much sleep over turn a vote out. They're going to decide maybe if it's too low, it's too embarrassing. Let's just put out a number that says 48% came to vote. That's close enough. That's what that happened with Raisi in 2021. That's fine enough. The regime at this point is more about managing the system, not creating headaches, not throwing up surprises for themselves. They had plenty of opportunities to create a much more exciting election than they ended up having. I mean, anybody with a bit of a political network behind them in Iran, in the Islamic Republic, is kept out. So they'd rather have Ali Khamenei wants individuals who are alone or loyal to him to run. So if you come from one of those centrist parties, that has a sort of a political system behind it, there's one party called Kargozaran. They have a network. They're a network of people. They actually could implement an agenda because it's not a one-man show. Pezeshkian is a one-man show. That's why he's allowed to run, because he can be controlled. And by the way, he doesn't even dare question the supreme leader. So people in Iran at this point, having given elections a chance for years now, I think gave up on elections, certainly by 2021, because, they've come out and voted and felt that maybe this time the regime's going to listen. Maybe they're going to make the difference in terms of their policies. But what does Ali Khamenei and his supporters right now in this election campaign keep reminding everyone, including the presidential candidates? Make sure you don't think you're going to be the top voice, because there is a top voice already. He's not running on 28th of June. He's been there since 89, and he will be there when the election is over. Don't forget that. That's the message that's coming very loud and clear from the Revolutionary Guards generals. And they're saying, we're not going to change course in terms of what we're doing in the region. We're not going to negotiate with the Westerners. We're not going to negotiate with our domestic opponents on things like the hijab. That's not negotiable. So, all that said, you're left behind thinking, so what the hell is the point of voting? Why would I come out and vote? You're saying on those key issues that I care about as an Iranian voter in 2024, none of them will be changed because of how I vote on the 28th of June. So why should I come out? Why shouldn't I spend more time filling out my visa application and emigrate to a North American or European country? Because that's frankly what a lot of people, including the youth in Iran, feel is the only way out of the misery that life has become in Iran today.
Alex, just following up on that, putting the shoe on the other foot, have any of the candidates kind of stepped out to kind of make promises on the economy, on the social issue front, on foreign policy? And are there any areas there where they have any wiggle room? They might have some potential to kind of shape things around the margins, or is it clear top-down orders, this is what it is?
Look, if anybody dares to say anything other than what has been kind of put out there by the Supreme Leader's office, I assume it's already been green-lighted beforehand as part of a large theater that's going on. None of these individuals, the 6 individuals, would willingly, openly go against the wishes of the Supreme Leader. And I don't want to maybe put too much emphasis on the Supreme Leader. He's one individual. The system is much more complicated than that. But I focus on that just because it's so informative in terms of focusing on the unelected office of the Supreme Leader versus the elected office of the presidency. Because people, particularly our listeners who mostly live in the West, would assume a president has certain powers. And frankly, in the Islamic Republic, the president today doesn't. The president nominally supervises things like the national budget, nominally can decide certain things in terms of environmental policy and sort of secondary issues. But when it comes to big issues like what do we do with the United States? Where are we on Israel? What should we do in the region vis-a-vis the Arab world? What should we do in terms of the crisis of corruption? And those things are all kind of decided not in the presidential palace, but elsewhere. And Iranians today know that. They've seen it for so many years now that they have given up on the idea of voting making a difference. So if there are candidates that come out and might say something in the next few days leading up to the election that sounds exciting, I would assume that's something that's part of that, again, political theater that's being micromanaged by the inner circle of Ali Khamenei and the Revolutionary Guards that are essentially going to make sure this election is not going to get out of hand. So let's not forget the role of the Revolutionary Guards. In fact, the people who are putting money on Ghalibaf are saying Ghalibaf is probably the closest thing of a consensus candidate from the Revolutionary Guards, and they want their man in the presidential palace because there's a succession process that's going to happen anytime when the 85-year-old Khamenei dies, and why not have someone that they can fully trust there instead of taking the chances with someone like Pezeshkian or even a crazy radical like Saeed Jalili. So I think that's how at least Iranian society right now is looking at the state of affairs.
Ali, I want to get your perspective here too, get your thoughts on this situation. Do you see any potential for significant changes on any of these issues, economy, foreign policy, etc.? And I guess also to what Alex was just saying, do you see any kind of divides within the different power centers in Tehran among who they're backing, who they're more concerned about or less concerned about in the election?
I agree with Alex that in the key decision making in terms of for the foreign policy, I don't see much influence by president. I don't want to say that he's nothing or has any impact or influence, but the influence is very limited. I think in the foreign policy, there is not much difference between the Pezeshkian's view and the Khamenei's view. The difference is in the tactic. The Pezeshkian also shares the anti-America, anti-Israel idea. So I think the only items that president still has some influence on that is economy. For sure that the economy that is leading by the Pezeshkian teams, not himself, because he personally has no any expertise on the economy issues. But it seems that he has the better team to manage that. But the problem is that first of all, the Iran has not much financial resources. It's the big issue first. The second is the big sanctions that doesn't allow Iran to sell freely its oils in the good price. But the most problem is that the corruption is not as just a systematic corruption, is the strategic corruption, is the main tools of the governance in the current Iran. So it's very difficult to fight with this deep-rooted corruption. And also the another problem is that the big deficiency budget, because the next president heritage, the Raisi's administration that is currently facing with the big budget deficit is another problem. And the high inflation rate and many problems. So I don't think that the next president, either be the Pezeshkian or the Ghalibaf, they can do anything significant for people to improve their daily life, to improve the economy. So that's why the Iranian people, especially in the last 7 days, it is the first time during the last 7 years that the society gradually believed himself that it has power to change radically, to change the Islamic Republic of Iran. So that's what the people are seeking for, that the big change, the structural change. The president, either be a good one or bad one, is not the solution. So I think that, again, I said that because I'm not predicting any turnout around 60% degrees. So there is not much chance for the victory of Pezeshkian. So most probably the Ghalibaf will be the next president of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So that's not a major or significant difference in Iran politics. I think that the polarized the country and society, the big gap between the government and the people continues. And for the government also, they don't want to see a major change. They want to consolidate the current situation and continue on that policy either with Pezeshkian or with the Ghalibaf. So the election is not much matter, in my opinion, in what happened in Iran in short term and in the long term.
I want to turn next to the impact of all of this on the eventual succession process. Alex, whoever wins the presidential elections may well be in office during Khamenei's death, the subsequent transition period, which could be a point of some kind of unrest, turmoil. Raisi, of course, had been seen as a leading potential successor. What impact does his death have on the kind of calculations around that and that whole process?
We don't really know if Raisi was on that short list. That's what most of us have been speculating the last couple of years. I mean, about a decade ago, suddenly there was a move to elevate Raisi, the man. That was before his first attempt at the presidency in 2017 when he lost to Rouhani. But the effort to elevate him began before that first run, and that continued throughout. There were famous visits by the senior members of the commanders of the Revolutionary Guards, including the now deceased Qasem Soleimani and so on, visiting him at his place in hometown of Mashhad. And he was sort of signifying to Iranian society, this is the guy the Revolutionary Guards want. But again, we just don't know for sure if that was the case. And certainly, and we spoke about this just a few minutes ago, there's a lot of suspicions about the way he died, that helicopter crash. Was it really a crash? Did he have enemies inside the regime that wanted him out? Because, and this is the hard reality of the Islamic Republic today, most of the most intriguing, colorful, perhaps deadly rivalries are not between the so-called reformists and moderates versus the hardliners, are in fact fights that are happening among the hardliners. It's Ghalibaf, his faction in the Revolutionary Guards, and other factions of the Revolutionary Guards, because these are networks that have been developed over the years, and they are pursuing not just power, but also the money that comes with the power. So, that's basically going to be the legacy of Ali Khamenei. He's been there since 1989. Yes, he has amassed amazing amounts of power. He is no different than the Shah in terms of how much power he has in many ways. But he's essentially also running a bit of a mafia-looking state today. And within this mafia organization called the Islamic Republic, you have different interest groups. And, for now at least, they believe the office of the Supreme Leader should stay. The question is, who should sit in the office of the Supreme Leader? What sort of person? So again, we can speak about the succession process, but a couple of things very quickly. Ali Khamenei could have had a deputy Supreme Leader years ago. He could come out and hint who he wants. There's been speculation his son might be a candidate. Again, we don't know if that's the case or not. My point is, that takes us to the person of Ali Khamenei. Someone who doesn't want to share the stage with anyone. It's about him. And he wants to run the show single-handedly, essentially, if you will, until the day he dies. And that creates the conditions we're in right now, where everybody's trying to jockey and second-guessing themselves.
Ali, I want to get your thoughts here as well. How do you see Raisi's death and the elections as affecting the sort of horse race around the potential succession to Ayatollah Ali Khamenei?
I don't consider much in stake in terms of the Khamenei succession to the presidential election. The Raisi was exceptional case because Raisi was a person has a chance to be a successor. But none of the current candidates for the presidential election has not that potential. So that's the first point. And the second point, we consider that determining the Khamenei successor and who's going to be the next in the Supreme Leader Court, I think that it's the main player is the first Khamenei and his close circle. The second is the assembly of experts that is dominated by the governmental clergies in Qom, in the seminary schools. And the third is the Revolutionary Guards. So that the president himself or itself has not much influence on that process. But in my opinion, the Raisi was not the major candidate for the alternative of the Khamenei. But it seems that he was part of the potential candidates. So he's gone. Right now, I think that the Khamenei's whole power until his death. Otherwise, that he faced a major health issues that we don't know about that. So, and also it seems that is not a very emergent case because the Khamenei now is 85 years. For example, right now the head of the assembly of experts is 93 years old, 8 years greater than Khamenei's age. So that Khamenei can pass these 8 years and also pass the current assembly of experts. So, but in this situation right now, I think if the Pezeshkian will be the next president, he is the minimum, he will have minimum influence on that process. But if the Ghalibaf will be the next president, maybe he has some deal in future with the person like the Mojtaba Khamenei. In that case, maybe it has some influence, but consider that influence doesn't come from a presidency position. It comes from the personality of the Ghalibaf and his tie with revolutionary guards and his networks, and that would be the case. Otherwise, I don't think so that this election has much influence or a big stake on the successor process of the Khamenei.
Great, thank you. We're running a little short on time here, but before we wrap up, I want to get both of your kind of concluding thoughts and your outlook for Iran moving forward. Ali, maybe let's start with you. Where do you see things going from here?
I think that this election is much more matter in the facing of the majority of people who are seeking with the radical change, with the government and with the both parties, the reformists and the principalists. The main competition, the main struggle is there, that Iranians to vote or not vote. That's the case, in my opinion. And inside the circle of power, I think that Ghalibaf relatively has more chance, and either he and Jalili, the both of them are principalists or hardliner, but relatively Ghalibaf is more pragmatic and less ideological. Yeah, that's my conclusion.
Alex, you've got the last word here. Where do you see things going?
Look, I don't want to comment on the outcome of the election, frankly, because I don't think it matters that much in the sense of it's not going to change lives for ordinary Iranians, unfortunately. But I do want to comment quickly in terms of this election being another lost opportunity for Ali Khamenei, who's been a supreme leader for 35 years, who's had so many opportunities to listen to his own people and choose a different direction to reconnect to the Iranian people. Certainly this younger demographic of Iranians who weren't there in 1979 when the likes of Ali Khamenei took over. Another lost opportunity. And, he brought Raisi in, gave him the presidency in the silver platter, and look where Iran is today. On every single indicator, things are worse off than before Raisi took over. And the same will happen with the next presidential election. But again, Khamenei believes in power, in hard power. He believes in you have to suppress the people because they don't know better than you. And that's going to be his political legacy. And this election is part of that package.
We'll have to leave things there for now. But Alex, Ali, thank you both very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Alistair.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting.
That's all the time we have for this week. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in, and to our podcast editor, Elliot Sanders, for all of his work on this week's episode. You can find all of MEI's latest coverage of regional issues on our website at www.mei.edu. You can follow MEI on X, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and subscribe to our email newsletters for the latest analysis and information about upcoming events. I'm Alistair Taylor. We will see all of you next week.
This has been a presentation of the Middle East Institute. To support MEI's programs and podcasts, please donate at www.mei.edu. Thank you for your support.